Hey, I'm socially impaired, and before I really get into what this video is all about, I just wanted to explain the new background and setup. So, I have in the past made a few videos where I try to make the setup of the video more like an interview, as opposed to just a reaction video. The reason that I did this was because not only was I reacting to what they were saying, but the way that it was set up made it seem like they were also reacting to what I was saying. So, while of course it's not an actual interview, it does however give off somewhat of that impression. And I noticed that when I was working on this video in particular, the same thing more or less was starting to happen. So I decided that, well, if I'm going to make a video that's closer to the impression of an interview, then I might as well just go all out and make an official setup specifically made for these types of videos. I got myself a nice background, I made everything flashy, put my ass in some new threads, and tried to make the general theme of this type of video be more like a news station. But I'm also curious on what you guys think of the new setup that's specifically designed for videos that attempts to give off the impression of an interview. I mean, hey, if you guys like it, then I won't change a thing. But if some of you have a very specific issue with something, along with a legitimate reason on why that is, then I'm certainly willing to reevaluate my current setup and possibly make changes if I feel that they are warranted. But if there are those of you who despise this setup, but are unable or are unwilling to give any legitimate reason on why you have such a disdain or hatred for the way that I choose to express myself, well, then you can go fuck yourself. That's right, go fuck yourself. I mean, I'm all for hearing people out, but if you just want to shit on my work for the pure sake of being a dick, then yeah, you can suck it. Okay, well now that that's all said and done with, let's get on to the video. So, today we have a young lady who has some pretty strange ideas about terminology and redefining things along with swapping out one word or a term for another. So, madam, if we as a society could swap out one phrase for another, then what would you want it to be?
It's time we stop saying white privilege and start saying white supremacy.
Okay. Well, before I really get into it, let me at least provide some context to the viewers. So, for those of you who do not know, white privilege is a term that was made up by social justice warriors in order to not actually change anything, but to make you feel guilty for simply being white. The concept behind the term is that the idea that you, as a white person, have a substantial sum of privilege throughout your life that drastically helps elevate you up the financial ladder. And these people take this concept to some of the most ridiculous and extreme levels. As an example, a mentally challenged homeless man, just barely scraping by in life, according at least to the majority of SJWs that I have asked, say that the homeless man who is struggling just to make ends meet has more privilege in life because he is white than does any black person in this country, regardless of how financially and intellectually well off they are, which includes people like Barack Obama. Now, most SJWs will almost never even attempt to try and give specific examples on where and how this privilege exists in our society, because it's not about actually trying to solve a problem, as it is about trying to make people feel guilty for being white. So the term white privilege is a made-up, nonsensical term used to describe every single white person as having privilege while making the minority out to be the victim by default. But now you want to replace the term white privilege, which is used to describe every single white person, with the term white supremacy. God damn, dude. I mean, I've heard of pushing the envelope or lowering the bar, but this is just breaking the bar right the fuck off. If you were looking to lose virtually all credibility and turn your movement into a fringe group that's populated with only the most extreme versions of the people that make up your ideology, then this is exactly how you do it. I can't even imagine just how unbelievably disconnected from the rest of society you must be in order to think that this is a good idea. I mean, just what groups of people are you listening to?
Popular social justice discourse has used white privilege to describe the benefits that come with whiteness.
Oh, well, I mean, there's your problem right there. You're listening to popular social justice warriors. And not even your average social justice wimp or your run-of-the-mill douchebag, but it's the popular ones. As in the craziest of the crazies. So, just stop doing that, and I think you'll be way better off. But I'm also getting off topic, so what benefits specifically do you believe are given to white people for the sole reason of them being white?
Benefits that look like housing, that look like healthcare and employment.
Okay, when I said specifics, I meant like statistics and actual studies that have been done on this subject that you could point to, allowing you to back up your claim, which would allow me to verify your claim. But when you randomly just list off large institutions that you associate with racism and bigotry, well, that really doesn't help anyone, and it is certainly not an argument. It's just, spouting things off without backing it up. So, I'm sorry, but yes, you're going to have to do better than this. Look, why don't you do me a favor and just describe what you believe white privilege is, and then we can go from there.
The problem with describing white privilege is it looks at the individual as opposed to the system itself. When we look at the individual and we say, here are the things that you should have, those white people who don't access those things might say, I don't have any privilege at all. We forget that the privilege in of itself is whiteness.
Privilege in and of itself is whiteness? So what are you saying? That some homeless man dying in the streets has access to privilege that you do not have access to because he is white and you are not? I mean, do you not understand how ridiculous that sounds? If you have a problem with the system itself, then that is where you should put your focus on. But when you say things like privilege in and of itself is whiteness, our response is, what the fuck are you talking about? What?
And so how do we get past the individual? We look at the system, and that system is white supremacy. What is white supremacy? White supremacy is the inherent belief that white people are superior to all other racialized groups and should therefore dominate society.
Yes, correct. White supremacy is the belief that the white race is biologically and psychologically superior to all other races, creating the belief that no other race should be allowed to run for office or hold any real power. White supremacy is a belief structure, not a system of power in and of itself. So when we're talking about white supremacy, we are talking about what certain individuals believe personally. As an example, if the majority of people in our country happen to be Christian, then that would not make this a Christian country. It would just mean that the majority of the population happened to be Christian. And only once the Constitution was rewritten and very specific laws were passed clearly favoring Christians over other religious groups, then you could consider this to be a Christian country. Just like if the majority of people in our country happen to be women, that doesn't make this a woman's country. It is about how we run things, the laws that we enact, and the constitutions that we follow that define the system that we live in. And one of the biggest problems in describing the system that we have as white supremacy is that we already have a group of people that refer to themselves as white supremacists and fulfill that actual definition of that term. So, when you replace the term white privilege with white supremacy and refer to our state of government and the powers that be as white supremacy, then you are only hurting your cause, because no one with the smallest level of standards and integrity could ever take you seriously. So if white supremacy really does exist in our form of government, then you have to give very specific examples exactly where it is and how it works.
Now, we see white supremacy in the educational system, we see it in the mainstream media, we see it in healthcare, and we see it in employment. Now, despite the fact that there are all these determinants of white supremacy, we still struggle to actually name the system itself.
How can you make such a bold assertion that white supremacy is in things like the mainstream media without backing it up with specifics and evidence? And remember, you just gave the definition of white supremacy as a belief structure, not a system at play, but a belief structure in which individuals believe that the white race is biologically and psychologically superior. So how can you go from that definition to just blatantly saying that we see white supremacy in all of these things? Look, if you said that white supremacy is spread throughout our government and our system of power, and that they are trying to change the rules and laws to only allow white people to gain power because of their inherent belief that whites are superior to all other races, then that is white supremacists trying to create a system of racism and suppression. And if that really is the case, then you need to make that your case, along with backing it up with coherent, specific examples. But it just does not make any sense at all to point at a system like the mainstream media and then just declare that we, not you, but we see white supremacy. Oh, and you said that we see white supremacy in the White House. Look, as far as I can tell, Donald Trump has never come out and said that the white race was superior for being white, nor has he said anything remotely like that. So as far as I can tell, you're just saying, well, he's a white guy and he's in the White House, therefore I see white supremacy in the White House. Okay, well, by that logic, does that mean that I would be justified in saying that we see black supremacy in the White House during the 8 years of the Obama administration? No, of course not. What a ridiculous and absurd concept. So if you're just going to straight up and outright say that we see white supremacy in the White House, then you're going to have to back up those claims with very specific examples along with the context of those examples. Okay, let me just sum up and make it very clear for your simple, stupid self. White supremacy is a very specific belief structure within a group of people that already exists and does not equal white privilege.
We can't be more afraid of naming white supremacy than of white supremacy. White privilege is only half the conversation. While many of you are afraid to talk about race,
Oh, I'm not afraid to talk about race, but I can tell you that there are those of us who are afraid to discuss this topic because when someone like a white person decides to talk about race, but they don't immediately bend over backwards, kissing the ass of other races, all while expressing guilt for being part of the white race, then they could easily be considered a racist. Now, this is not because they are actually a racist, but because they don't blindly follow the crazy-ass, idiotic ideology on the left that makes up groups like social justice warriors. The terms like racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, white supremacy, fascist, and Nazi are thrown around so often and so casually from SJWs that it really feels like these words are starting to lose almost all of their meaning. And I would say at this point that they were meaningless if it wasn't for the very real fact that you could actually ruin someone's life, whether it be family or financially, by going after them so aggressively as if they just captured a witch from their hunt. And based on their own insane standards, they will very aggressively mock, ridicule, and stalk this person, along with putting forth real effort in regards to showing up at their work or getting a hold of their employer in order to have them lose their employment. And they can succeed, along with their cult-like ability to drive friends and family apart. So when these people on the left start to rile up their mob of nutjobs under these circumstances, then yes, they can do real damage to the person that they're stalking and harassing. which is why so many people fear just talking about race. I think I would like to take this opportunity to say to those victims of social justice warriors that regardless of the cost that you may endure, never back down from these people. Their aggressive bullying tactics are the acts of desperation. And while they may sway a large number of gullible minds who are not really engaged, they will not win the hearts and minds of the majority in the long run. At the end of the day, we will win. Because while we might not have the perfect ideology or even agree amongst ourselves on what that is, we can agree more or less that we can be wrong and will change our minds for the better if given legitimate reason to do so in regards to critical thinking and rational arguments. The SJW crowd shows no sign of having this ability, which will inevitably be their downfall. Groups like this never stand the test of time, and towards the end, they will be a fractured fringe group that will end by collapsing in on itself. Just remember that the most dangerous groups of people are not the ones that are the most hated with the worst ideas and no power, but the most dangerous groups are the ones who disguise themselves with good intentions and seek to silence all opposing opinions. White supremacists, deplorable as they are, don't come close to having that kind of real swaying power over our society. And in regards to SJWs, it is important to keep in mind that there are plenty of people who use the term SJW to describe anyone that they disagree with, using the term as if they're describing the boogeyman, leading people who are ignorant of the topic to believe that an actual SJW might not actually exist. This is why it's so important not to just throw words around as if they have no meaning. Because the more that you do this, the more that those words lose their actual meaning. I assure you that SJWs very much exist. These are people with very specific mindsets that leads them to act in a very particular kind of way. Whether it be the way that they view the world, their attitudes and behaviors, or the way that they conduct themselves. So please allow me to describe the actions and behaviors that are most often associated with SJWs. If you're a person who gets easily triggered and needs a safe space so that you can feel protected from what you believe to be bad ideas, if you're a person who breaks down emotionally when faced with the smallest amount of opposition, then immediately proceeds to cause a large and loud scene because of how emotionally fragile you are, then you're probably an SJW, or part of the far, far right, but definitely a snowflake. If you feel an unjustifiable sense of righteousness, that you must be right, and anyone with an opposing view must by definition be wrong, and it is up to you to express to everyone how wrong they are, all while talking down to them with a very smug and condescending attitude, then you're probably a social justice warrior, or a religious crusader. If you believe that all white people are racist for the simple fact that they are white, if you believe that all men are sexist for the simple fact that they are men, then you're probably an SJW, and somewhat of a sexist, and racist. If you'd like to regress back to a time where segregation based on race was a real thing, except you would like to shift the benefits to the minority while suppressing the majority, then you're probably an SJW, or a Black Lives Matter activist. If you're constantly feeling the need to apologize for your race and gender, all while giving special treatment to the race and gender that is not your own, then you're probably an SJW, and an idiot. If you're part of a movement that does not have any real goals or policies, if you're content with screaming, being upset, and making a scene without actually focusing on any real change of substance, all while screaming fascist or Nazi at your opposition, and also putting forth a great deal of effort in making sure that your opposition cannot be heard as they conduct their speech or protest. If you don't believe that hate speech is protected under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and also believe that you personally have the right to physically stop or shut down a speech or protest that you personally deem to be incorrect, then you're probably an SJW and somewhat of a fascist, and are most likely associated with modern-day feminism, or the Black Lives Matter movement, or part of Antifa, or you could be part of the BAM movement, which is short for by any means necessary. But either way, if the majority of things that I have listed apply to you, then you are most likely an SJW. So when I use the term SJW, which is short for social justice warrior, these are the people that I am referring to. So just so we're clear. But man, I'm sorry, I am getting way off topic. So what were you talking about again?
Not only are white supremacists talking about race, but they're informing a new generation. With recent events in Charlottesville and in the White House, white supremacists are being given a platform for their hate.
Yes, all American citizens under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution have a platform to express their ideas regardless of how unpopular those ideas are, provided that their opinions are not a direct threat of violence. And direct is key. I don't want you wording your way around that. And the way that you fight against ideas you disagree with is by becoming their political and or ideological opposition. You fight against their ideas with your own ideas. And hey, guess what? It's already worked. Besides very, and I mean very small pockets of white supremacist groups that still exist in this country, almost all American citizens believe that it is a terrible thing to be a white supremacist. So you've already won. White supremacy is a very, and I mean very, small minority group that virtually everyone despises. Whether it be their ideas or the people themselves, almost everyone despises these groups of people and what they stand for. So besides a few nut jobs that make up the members of these groups, they are almost non-existent and are universally despised. I mean, there's almost nothing there to stop.
We must stop white supremacists, but we also must fight the system that produces them.
If you really believe that there is a system at play that actually supports the belief that white people are superior to all other races, then you need to very clearly explain the specifics on where it is, how it works, and how to stop it. And since you are unable to do this, along with a lot of other reasons, I, nor should anyone else, take you seriously. Well, seeing how that's all that you had to say, and seeing how my response is approaching the end, let me just see if I can sum up the general theme to your argument. Okay, so you believe that there is white supremacy within our system, and that system is white people, for simply being white, have an unfair advantage when it comes to privileges like our school system, the mainstream media, and other large institutions that make up our society. That comes with great privileges, specifically for white people for being white. But you don't directly say what those privileges within those systems are, nor do you explain how one would receive those privileges by being white. Now, this concept of white people receiving privileges by being white is believed almost exclusively by SJWs. But you feel that this term doesn't focus on the system of racism, but on the individual. And even though I can come up with examples in which certain individuals could never have privileges in life just for being who they are, which is white, but you insist that they have for some reason, without explaining the specific privileges that they have access to, and why they would choose not to access them. Okay, well here's the thing. If there really was such a system of racism rooted into our system of government and society, then I would love nothing more than to help you fight against that. But for me to believe your extreme, over-the-top, and absurd claims, then you would need to back it up with very specific details like well-thought-out, rational arguments and evidence. Without this, it is virtually impossible for any reasonably intelligent person to take you seriously. I mean, you actually want people to replace the term white privilege with white supremacy. The majority of SJWs refer to all white people as having white privilege. So if they were to accept your request, then they would essentially be saying that every white person is by default a white supremacist. I not only find this to be absurdly ridiculous, but it actually creates quite the conundrum for me. I mean, if the SJW crowd actually took you seriously and did this, while they may recruit some more extremists to their side, they will most certainly alienate virtually anyone who is not already a member or who does not already have this type of mindset. So I believe that society would actually benefit by you and social justice warriors going down this more extreme path. But it would also mean that I would be rooting for you to double down and become more extreme. I would actually be rooting for something that I vehemently disagree with. So I find myself in a real ideological pickle here. I mean, do I support my principles in regards to what the truth is, regardless of the outcome? Or do I fight for you to double down on something that I disagree with, knowing that it will only hurt your group in the long run? Really, I'm actually quite stumped on this one. I don't know which side I should root for in this particular case. So I guess I'll ask you, the viewer, are principles the end-all be-all regardless of the outcome? Or should I root for something that I don't believe in, believing that it will only help my cause, which is the downfall of the SJW view of the world? I really don't know what the answer is to this question, because I consider it a conflict of interest, which is why I ask you out there. Please, what is the answer to this question?
The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth, whether it's scientific truth, or historical truth, or personal truth. It is the guiding principle on which Starfleet is based. Now, if you can't find it within yourself to stand up and tell the truth about what happened, you don't deserve to wear that uniform.
Oh, okay, never mind. I got it now. I should always stand by my principles and root for the truth on all sides, regardless of the outcome and the circumstances involved. I mean, if I compromised on my principles for what I believe to be the greater good, then where does it end? For all I know, one day I could wake up trying to prevent the people that I disagree with from being able to express themselves, all because I believe that the ends justify the means. No, I must be principled and fight for the truth and for what is right, regardless of the outcome. Otherwise, I'm no better than the opposition that I fight against, and I ask all of you to do the same. We cannot beat them by becoming them.